It is the prerogative of a woman to change her mind, and it is the prerogative of a GM as well. So I have changed my mind a little bit based on what I said at the end of the last video in terms of how I was going to structure this adventure. What I've got here is my party, and I've picked up, this is going to be my priest, this little doggy here who someone in my family thinks it looks like a llama, but I think it's supposed to be a dog. In any event, I may need to do some different minis when I actually work with this map due to the size issue, but here is my party, and I mentioned in the other video, and I'm sticking to that, what you're seeing here in terms of the map is from the Beast Lord. It is the tactical map. This is the Beast Lord here, for those of you that want to take a look at this crazy fantasy art there. Came with two maps, and this one is basically blank, and it has 4 quadrants. It has, yes, quadrants here that have different terrain in them, and they match up a little bit. Let me explain to you how I changed my mind. What I said at the end of the last video was that I was going to be running through the programmed adventure unicorn, search for the unicorn gold, and sort of using that as a structure that I would play off of and then add in my own story. I looked at that and started to do it and realized it would not work. It's too structured, and it just goes against the, really too far against the design of that system, and it's not worth doing. I definitely recommend seeking it out if you're interested in this and just playing it for what it is, but it's not going to serve my purpose well. So I'm going back to what I was demonstrating a little bit before when this video series started, the Treasure of the Silver Dragon. Now, in the Treasure of the Silver Dragon, this is the map from the Treasure of the Silver Dragon. What we're going to be doing on this map is using it as a starting point for our party to go through and follow basically the directions that you would do in that micro quest, where you are walking through various terrain. There is savanna hexes, hills, mountains, and water, and that's going to roughly correspond to this, which we'll talk about. And you are rolling a d10, and on a certain roll, and we'll follow the rules that they have set up here based on where you are. Actually, I'm in the wrong system here. Based on what terrain you are in and what you roll, you may have an encounter. And so we're going to be doing that to determine whether or not we have encounters. And here's the encounter occurrence table. So at the beginning of every turn, we're going to do our roll, and if our die roll matches up with the terrain that we're on, and again, we're traveling here on this map, following these rules to start, we will have an encounter. Now, when we have an encounter, we're going to start to pick up some of the material from In the Labyrinth, as I discussed in the other video, and also bring in our encounters that we rolled up and discussed in the prior video from the other book. So that's referring to this whole series of encounters with that might involve the water elemental and whatever. And I'm going to show you in the video how this occurs. When this occurs, we are going to be moving to this map here from the Beast Lord, and what I'm going to do is I will roll a d4 to determine which sector of the map we're dealing with, and I'm going to be using the existing on this map. There are these points and stars that have to do with the other game, and there are 4 of them. I'm sort of obscuring one of them here. Based on my d4 roll, I'm going to start out using this section for the encounter, whatever it might be, and bringing in the relevant terrain effects that we might have and translating them over. So these will be the savanna hexes, these will be the mountains, these will be the hills, and then of course there are the water features. Now we know from the previous video something is going to be happening with us with water and this mirage of a tower and etc. So perhaps when we get to this, if I roll a d2, a 2 on the d4, we may have that encounter here. It's a fluid system, obviously. I mean, that's what solo gaming is about in this regard, at least for me. I sort of establish the rules that I'm going to be following as best I can, and then you see what unfolds. So in the rest of the video, I am going to be traveling here, having an encounter, and coming back and demonstrating an example of a random encounter that comes directly from this system, that is to say from the Unicorn Gold pre-programmed, excuse me, from the Silver Dragon pre-programmed adventure, which will happen when we get to one of these numbered hexes, and I'll show you how that works. And the rest of it is going to be coming from the In the Labyrinth system that I create with my D100 rolls to see what we encounter, and also filtering in what I've created in the meta story of bringing my elderly wizard here, this fellow right here, accompanied by his student, the young wizard, and the scholar and the priest, who are at odds with each other a little bit, and of course the two fighters. We're instructed in the search for the Silver Dragon to start out at any edge of the map, and this is the the Treasure of the Silver Dragon map from 1980 Metagaming, and this represents my party right here. And basically what we're doing is we're rolling as we come to an unnumbered hex. We're simply doing a roll of the D10 that you see here, and based on the terrain that we're on, this is a savanna, so we would, at a 9 or a 10, we would have an encounter. So that's a 4, no encounter. And we continue on. Now, in that game, what you're doing is you are doing this until you're trying to reach these numbered hexes, and this is where the paragraphs come in. When I played through for the initial video I went to hex 150, so I'm not going to do that here. That seemed to be the shortest route. I know what's in hex 150, so my aim right now is to get to hex 400 there, but we'll see what happens with the encounters, because that could direct us somewhere else. That's a 6, again, still looking for a 9 or a 10. And not doing so well here with my setup. We got it. We got a 10 right there. So what this means is we are now going to have an random encounter on a Savannah hex, and I will take you through again how I do that using the flora and fauna from the In the Labyrinth system. We're rolling our 2 D10s, and we have the 1s is the blue and the white is the 10s. So we have rolled a 24, and I'm looking that up in my binder here that I have numbered in the past. And I'll just show you what that is, and we'll see what 24 is. Now, if 24 turns out to be something that really realistically in the sense of this fantasy world would not be in a Savannah hex, we will reassess the situation and I guess re-roll. But let's see what 24 is, and I'll show you exactly how that encounter would work. 24 going to be some ogres. That'll work. Ogres. The ogres were the forebears of the giants. For all practical purposes, an ogre is a very stupid, very vicious giant with a taste for meat, any kind. Ogres have the same characteristics as giants, except that their IQ is never over 6. Oops, sorry about you not seeing that. That's unfortunate, because with a low IQ, we can't actually try to negotiate with them, and that would have been nice to try to do, because we have in our party, our priest and our scholar could have tried to do something there, but that's not going to happen. They fight only with giant-sized clubs and wear little or no armor. They're usually found alone, etc. So that is our encounter. I need to look up in the chart what their stats are, and I'll show you what that is, and I'll show you how a combat actually occurs. There ends up being a lot of paperwork and notes when you are playing this way, or at least when I'm playing this way, in addition to the books and the maps and things like that. So it has to be organized in a manner, and the way that I do it is by the use of cards. So I take all of this stuff and I turn it into this. This is my party. We have our scholar here, and his attributes are, this is taken from In the Labyrinth on various cards. This is his basic attribute as a scholar, and the various talents that he has that I have assigned to him at the beginning of the game. He is a naturalist, knowing about herbs. He's also an expert naturalist, in fact. The expert requires the naturalist's talent. He can detect traps. He can assess value of things. He also knows strategy. So this is a little bit about his character, and as we play, as we come into certain situations, I can easily flip through the cards and see whether there is something that he can bring to bear to use in that situation. This is our priest, and so we have his basic characteristic as a priest here, and he has other things that I have devised. I mentioned earlier on I wanted to make some conflict between the two of them, so I gave the scholar, as mentioned, he's sort of a naturalist, whereas the thief is a little bit more wily, the priest is a little bit more wily. He's also a thief, and he has some skills like silent movement and spying. He can also bring new followers to the party. This may come in handy somewhere down the road as the adventure develops and encounters with other potential joiners to our party occur. He's alert, etc. So when we have situations that are not just combat related with other basic NPCs or other situations, we will use his talents. Our old wizard here, the dog up there, has many skills, you'll recall, but his basic stats are such that he's relatively weak. So while he has many skills to choose from, he needs to be very judicious in the use of them, because he doesn't have many strength points to bring to cast spells and to continue to have spells in effect. But he has a lot of them. He has Dazzle. He has some very high point spells. He can cast wards on doorways and things. He has a lot of summoning spells. But again, and this is a basic, he can take his staff, turn it into a snake. That's a pretty basic one, but it does cost him 3 strength, and he doesn't have a lot of strength. He can come to the aid of others. So again, he has a defensive spell where he can, move away and avert danger to himself. He can summon a bear. These are chosen at the beginning of the adventure to try to flesh out and develop a character along the lines that might make sense. And to that end, with our young wizard, he's got far fewer spells. Well, his summoning spell is a wolf, so he can bring a wolf into play. But his other spells, he can create a small illusion. He's learning, he can control an animal. He can trip someone, knock them down. He's got the magic fist, so of course he can have a telekinetic blow, and he can cause somebody to drop a weapon. So he's learning some things. He's got some summoning spells, but a lot of these are, well, first of all, he doesn't have that many, and second of all, a lot of them are relatively basic, somebody tripping, somebody dropping a weapon, or he can call a wolf, which is great, but it's not like calling a bear or a gargoyle or a giant or something like that. And then we have our 2 fighters, as discussed. We have our bowman, who is going to be our have ranged capacity, and our fighter who's carrying a battle axe. I think this possibly can also be thrown, so we may have some ranged ability there. So what happens when they all encounter this orc? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll our d4, and we're going to see which area, 1, 2, 3, or 4 of this map we're going to set up for this encounter. So we rolled a 1, so that's going to be setting up here. Here we are. Here is our party. I've switched over to some Beast Lord counters. These are our wizards, our fighters, and our scholar and our priest are represented together on this one counter, and here they are. The ogre that we see in the distance is over here in this counter. Because we're playing this as we are, what we're going to do is we're going to do a roll here to question whether or not we would actually have combat. And this is where I'm going to be using the fate chart. We are at a chaos rank here of 5. Things are just starting out. We are in the middle, and I would say that it is probably very likely that as we're wandering along, we would see this ogre, it would see us, and combat would ensue. But we're going to roll on this chart here to see whether that actually happens, and based on where we are in chaos and the answer to that question, we're looking at an 85% chance that there will be combat. We're using our two D10s here, and based on the roll, 81. So there is going to be some combat. The combat is played out in turns, and the first thing we do is to roll for initiative, and whoever gets the high roll can choose to move on that turn or to have the other side move. So our ogre here in this case is going to be the green die, we're going to be white, and whoever rolls high will have the initiative. That is going to be us. So we are going to choose, certainly, I think, to move. And when you move here, you then have some choices about what you're going to do. You can move your full movement allowance, and that's it. You can move up to half your allowance and then try to attack if you're close enough. I don't know that we would be. We've basically got movement allowances here about 8 or 10, and these hexes are cost 2, 1. This stream isn't going to really impact anything, so we're really talking about 2 and 1 movement here. I don't think we would get far enough even with our bowmen to do much, so we would probably just start moving in, and then our ogre is obviously going to see us here. He's got a movement allowance of 10. He's going to move closer, and then we're going to get close enough to have some action. We've moved, and now we're going to roll again to see. We're close enough to have some combat. We're going to roll again to see who gets the initiative to start fighting first. And we did, actually, 2 against 1. So we have the initiative, and what we will be doing is acting in order of our dexterity. Our most dexterous party member is actually the young wizard. The young wizard is the blue counter here, and he has... Let's just see what he has, if he can do something. I think ultimately we are going to need to use some magic here to deal with this ogre, because the ogre stats are pretty rough. I will tell you, this is what we're looking at with the ogre here. Only has an IQ of 6, which means we're not really going to be able to negotiate or use any of those talents with him. He's kind of dumb. I think 8 is the average IQ. I'll check on that, but 8 or 10. Very strong. 9 dexterity, and again IQ of 6, movement allowance of 10. He's carrying a club, which is going to do 2d6 worth of damage, and actually, I've got him carrying a spiked club, because I looked this up. This is where the things didn't quite match up. So I think I said that because he is an ogre, basically a giant, he had more than just a basic club. This is from the melee rules. I made a note here, and he's going to be doing 2-1 in hand-to-hand, and he's going to be doing 1+1 for every 10 strength points. So basically 2+2 damage with that, because he's got 25 strength. So this is, you've got to do a little pulling things together, because you're not actually going right off a chart, since there wasn't an ogre set up in the melee rules. But so we got a lot to deal with, because he's pretty strong. So looking at what our young wizard has, he's got, he can make the victim drop his weapon, and then that would bring him to hand combat. He's got his 2-1 damage. That's a 2d6 -1 points of damage. He's still really strong. Could do that. Summoning a wolf, that could happen. Don't really want to do that right away. Cast an illusion, not really relevant. Control an animal, again, not relevant, because this ogre can't be controlled in that way. Knocks the victim down. Well, he's not really... This only works if he's on, let's see, it says Edge of a chasm, pit, river, etc. Well, we're away from the river. These are hills, so this isn't going to be relevant. And, well, magic fist here, but we're not adjacent, so we can't do that. Drop the weapon is really the only option here that we could try to cast. Maybe we'll do that. Here's how this is going to work. You notice that there is the letter T here after the drop weapon spell. This means it's a thrown spell. There are different types of spells, and the thrown spells can be cast at a distance, and our young wizard is 3 hexes away from the ogre. For every hex away that you are to cast a thrown spell, you have to subtract 1 from your dexterity, and what you're trying to do to successfully cast is to roll against your dexterity lower than that with your 3d6s. He's got a high dexterity, so his dexterity going in is 20. His adjusted dexterity is going to be 17 for this spell. I don't think there are any other dexterity adjustments I need to make. Let me just think about that for a second. No, there aren't. So what he's going to need to do is he's going to have to get a number of 17 or less on this roll, and obviously that's going to be pretty likely to happen, but we'll just make sure it does, and indeed it does. So he rolled a 12. That was successfully cast, and the ogre has dropped his weapon. And we also need to note here, we'll keep track of this off camera, that because the ogre's basic strength is 20 or more, this is actually costing us 2 strength points to cast for this turn. So we need to make a note of that, and the young wizard has helped us out initially, and next up is going to be our bowman here, who is at a range that he can attack the ogre, and we'll see what kind of damage he can do with that crossbow. I don't know why I keep changing the name of what this guy has. This is a heavy crossbow, and this is a missile weapon, and he is 3 hexes away. 1, 2, 3, and so he's going to have an adjustment to his dexterity of -1 on that. He's starting out with a dexterity of 18, so he's at 17. As long as he remains 16 or above, he can shoot this thing once every 3 turns, and the potential damage that it does is 3d6. So we're rolling our dice against an adjusted dexterity of 17, and again, same kind of scenario here. I'm going to try not to keep moving these things, where if this is a very likely success to hit, and wow, 10, whoa, that was pretty close. All right, so barely. He is going to land a hit on this ogre, and then we roll we roll again. In this case, again, the damage that it does is 3 d6s, so we're going to roll here to see how much we do, and of course we're probably going to get a lower roll. 6, 7, 8, well, that's not so bad. 12. So we have to keep track of that. We landed a nice shot here over at our ogre, and we're going to mark that down and continue on. A note here, when you are playing 1 against 1 in the rules as written, you're rolling for initiative after every round. So, for example, after the magician cast this spell, you would be re-rolling to see if the ogre responded or if the magician went. I'm playing a party against 1 or more, and so the way that I do it in the rules is we do 1 initiative roll per round, and that initiative roll is going to enable all of us to act if we want to act. But what will happen is anytime any damage is inflicted on our opposition, they will have the opportunity, if they want to respond to that. So some of their responses could be, for example, they could try to disengage. Well, basically, they could try to disengage. And in this particular case, this is where, again, the fluidity of the system has to come in. You can turn to the fate chart if you want to do a roll on that. What is the likelihood that a stupid, big, gigantic ogre who was just pinged for 12 wounds out of the blue is going to run away, what is the likelihood of that? Well, it's not great. So you can do a roll on that, or you can just say to yourself, it's not great, and continue on with the round. So that's what I would do to just try to minimize some of the dice rolling if I was playing on my own. You know, videotaping this and playing it out for a video treatment is different, because one of the great things about playing this way is just the involvement that you get, and it kind of flows. And I think for those of you that play this way in whatever system you're using, you know what I mean. Like, you just kind of get into it and follow whatever you're doing without too much thought. But in this particular case, I just wanted to make that explicit, why we are continuing our assault, and then when that is done, we are going to give the ogre a chance to make a decision about what he's going to do. Assessing the situation here, because we were so successful with this missile attack with the bowman, I'm going to not use the strength of my old wizard right now. It's very early on. He won't have a chance to recover for a while, and I don't really think we need to do much more. We've forced our ogre here to drop his weapon. The young magician came forward and did what he could to really help out. Our bowman was effective, and our other fighter is too far away to do anything. The priest and the wizard, as mentioned earlier, are really just out of this. They can't use any of their talents to influence the situation, because the ogre is just kind of a dumb fellow, and there's not really much looking through their talents. Let me just, there's not really a whole lot. There's certainly nothing the priest can do. And let's see, what does the scholar have? I mean, there's nothing to be detected here. There's nothing to heal yet. Charisma is not going to work on an ogre anyway. So the priest and the scholar are out of it. And I think that therefore concludes our side of this combat for this round. So what would the ogre do? Well, the ogre would come at us. He would attack somebody, and he can move up to his half of his movement allowance, which is 10. He could get to any of us, really, and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Now, I'll say that at least the basic melee rules are a little vague on whether a disengaged figure can move and then charge as a hand-to-hand combat, as opposed to charging and attacking with a weapon. But just using logical sense, that would be the case. So the question is, how do you decide who is going to be the recipient of the ogre's attack? You could go at it a number of different ways. You could say, logically, well, whoever he sees, whoever is closest to him, and in that case, it's going to be this fellow right here. You could say, well, let me just randomize it and assign values and do some dice rolling in terms of which direction he's going to move. You could also, assign values here in terms of which direction he's going to move. My sense of playing this, and if I was playing it off a video, is he would just go for the closest guy. So this is what I am going to say will happen. Our ogre is moving into the hex with our fighter here, and he is going to conduct hand-to-hand combat, and he's definitely going to do some damage right there. I shouldn't have said he would be definitely successful, because of course he's got to roll against his dexterity to see if he is able to do any damage, and in this case his dexterity is a 9. There's no adjustments to it. So, whoops, we're going to roll these and see what we get. And he got an 8. So he is going to do some damage, and in hand-to-hand combat, the ogre does, what did I say here? 2 minus 1 hand-to-hand damage. So what that means is that's 2d6s minus 1 worth of damage on that fighter there. So that's a 10. Well, that's not great. So that's 8 points of damage on our fighter, and I'd remind myself what the strength value of our fighter is at 18. No, he's at 22. So he's lost a bit, and we got to keep track of that, and we continue on. I played out the rest of this off video, and basically what ended up happening was a skirmish here between the ogre. Well, I don't know if you could say skirmish when an ogre is involved, but hand-to-hand close combat between the ogre and our fighter here. Now, the ogre didn't get as lucky off camera as he did on, because with a dexterity of only 9, he kept missing and had an inability to do any damage. So in the end, the fighter took those 8 hits, the ogre was eliminated, and the old magician did not participate. The crossbowman didn't have to come back in, because just when he was able to come back in the 3rd round, the ogre was out of it. And so that is where we landed at the end of this combat, and that's a little glimpse into how the combat itself works. We have traveled on. Time has passed. We have had a bunch of different encounters. We're back here at the main map. This is the map from the Treasure of the Silver Dragon, and I mentioned in one of the earlier videos that our goal was to get to one of these numbered hexes, because this is where we're going to pick up part of the structure from the Treasure of the Silver Dragon and use that as a jumping off point for the rest of our adventure. I mentioned that earlier when I played this out, I had traveled to hex 150, so I decided to go to hex 400 here, and this is where we are. What we will do then now, and if you're, if you don't want any spoilers for this particular micro quest, you should click away until the next segment when the spoilers are over, because now we're getting into some spoilers. We're going back to our fantasy trip here, and we're finding that micro quest. And we, what hex was that number? It's like so super small. What did I say? It was getting on to 400. So we're going to land on hex 400, and we're going to basically be looking up here. This comes into the choose your own adventure scenario, and we're going to go to 400, and we're going to see what is just what happens here. Well, you arrive at a small crumbling stone building near number 1 that appears to be a temple. It is dusk. There appears to be very faint noise and possibly lights somewhere within. So a building within, we can travel on. I think we're going to, I think we're just going to, it's hard to not explore a building. Let's go to 41 and just see what we get. So 41... You find a narrow tunnel going down at a slant. You see it only because there is some noise from it. You may go up and travel on, or to any adjacent unnumbered hex, or go down. I don't want to go down. I'm not interested in doing that right now. I want to demonstrate something that's outside. So I've been to 150. I'm going to go to 250. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this? All right, 250. You come upon a small caravan of traders with pack animals encamped near the main trail. There are 2 traders, 4 guards, and about 10 other servants or helpers. I can attack them, I can pass by, or stop and chat. Now, this is where I am going off of here. It's brought me to some encounter. I know within this rule set there are probably values for who would be in the caravan and the traders, because they have the values for the group encounter. So if I was going to have a conflict or an attack, that's what I would pick up. I don't want to do that. What I do want to do is turn to my priest and my scholar to see what types of talents they have. Now, reminding us that the priest is charismatic, so he gets +1 on reaction rolls. So I may have him try to talk to these traders and perhaps ask them a question about something. The question is, what is he going to be asking them a question about? And this is where you need to be thinking on both sides of the equation, as it were. Now, I know in my mind that we were or could encounter this nymph, or we might encounter a nymph and be chasing her. Again, our bigger story is we're trying to take the wizard somewhere. So maybe they're going to ask, something about where we can go to help our wizard, to help our old wizard. And the question is, are these traders going to be helpful to us or not? So we can pick up using our, this is really just to demonstrate how it would work, but we can pick up using our charisma trait to give us a +1 on the reaction rolls, and except with animals, zombies, demons, and similar nasties. And it gives us a chance to make friends with the creatures. So basically, we're going to be rolling 3 dice against our IQ and seeing whether or not, how we roll on the reaction table. The reaction table is, and here it is. We've got possibilities of reactions from hostility to unfriendliness, neutrality, friendliness, great friendliness, and some description about what that actually means. I think I misspoke and may have said it was the priest. It's the scholar who's charismatic. In any case, he's basically going to be an automatic hit here because it's 3Ds, 6s against his IQ of 18. So that's an automatic success. What we do get because of the charisma is an automatic +1 on the D6 roll to see what is actually going to happen. So we're rolling, well, you know what? We got a 1. And let us see what that is telling us. That's telling us, that brings up to a 2, unfriendly. A request will not be granted or will be granted under the harshest possible conditions. A party of travelers will be ordered away, insulted, or otherwise made to feel unwelcome, and so on. So our scholar there was not successful, and the question is, can the priest, who also sees himself as a leader, do anything? Does he have anything that he can help out with here? And one of the things that he can do is, he's a tracker. So he can look in this hex and see what has passed within the last day and get a general idea of what frequents an area. Of course, if the GM misses the IQ roll, he can lie to the tracker or say that nothing has passed. So the question is, can he use this tracking successfully, number 1, and then the question remains, what will he have seen? Maybe they're looking for a trail to where they want to go. And this is when we can come back to, well, let's first of all roll. So rolling against his IQ is a 16, so that's likely to be successful, but let's just make sure. And what we're getting, yes, 6 and 5, we got 11. So he's going to be able to do this tracking. And then we're going to turn to the question of, what is he going to see? How likely is it that he's going to see a trail leading them toward the tower where they want to go? And maybe on this trail is when they're going to encounter that nymph that we talked about earlier. The decision I made to come in at that point didn't turn out to be terribly exciting, but I think it gives you a sense of how I use the various materials to craft this adventure and come in and out of the pre-programmed structure and try to append onto that my other story. In this case, my ultimate goal, my ultimate narrative trajectory had to do with my own story and not that of the pre-programmed adventure. But of course, you don't have to run it that way. And overall, I think for a system that is not terribly complicated, there's a lot of flexibility in it. Obviously, there are like literally millions of RPG systems out there and millions and hundreds of millions of pages of rules and monsters and terrains and etc. that you can read. This is just a sampling of one that I have used from time to time because it's not terribly complex. It offers me enough of a structure that I can build off of it and still have some consistency from session to session and throughout the narrative of what the characters are, what they're doing, what the constraints are, and the rules that are in place to create the world that then establishes the story and provides the meaning. And that is just a small view into an old rule set and a new rule set and how they can be put together in a pretty simple way. I think in the world of RPG rule systems, these are very simple and basic, and for me that works. Obviously that's not for everybody, but I thank you for watching and for your interest in this series.